One of the things that I love is that two films idea of your life. And there's like two stories you can tell. One that is safe and full of regret, and one that is risky and full of pride and joy.
So I never imagined this. I never imagined I'd be here in my own house delivering a DO lecture live. And it feels a bit strange. I feel a bit vulnerable, somewhat isolated, and it's very new and unexpected. And I think what we're doing with this in microcosm is something we've all been facing over the last few weeks and probably will face in the weeks to come, of being this kind of strange, unknown place where lots has changed and lots is uncertain. I wrote a book about pausing, and in Do Pause I said, if you don't stop to think, life will force you to stop and think. And at the time I was really mostly imagining people who burn out. I was thinking of that kind of unreasonable expectation many hardworking individuals have of themselves, who just drive themselves into the ground. I wouldn't claim any foresight, but now we find ourselves in a world where that phrase, the idea of life forcing us to stop and slow down and pause, has kind of a new resonance. And that's been very abrupt and very disorienting for most of us, if not all of us. And I think it's going to ask us for some special things. It's going to ask us to be compassionate to each other, obviously, as people suffer. There's inevitably going to be lots of hardship and suffering, and already is as part of this. But also compassionate to ourselves, and to consider, how do we look after ourselves and our own health and our own well-being and our own sanity, perhaps, in these unusual times. It's going to call for courage, because we don't know what's happening, and we're going to have to try new things and do things in different ways. And I think it's also going to call for patience, because we really don't know where we're going to come out. And I think it could be very easy to get ahead of ourselves. And with that in mind, I think the thing to do for me first is to actually pause on this pause and think, well, can we understand what's actually going on here? This is new. There's never been anything like this before. If we go back 100 years to the influenza epidemic at the end of the First World War, it was a totally different world then. So this is totally new. It's, as we say, the DO lecture is the end of normal. And whatever role you're playing, whether you're in the front line or whether you're stuck at home, this is new and different. And nobody here is an expert. You may be a technical expert of a particular field, but nobody knows what happens in circumstances like this. So in my own work, I've been working here at the university in Oxford and with all sorts of clients for many years, if not decades, around dealing with uncertainty and improvising, and more recently, kind of working with pause and pauses. And I find myself struggling just like anyone else, because the scope of this, the scale of this is unheralded. We're now in times of uncertainty which are both deep and wide. And if we've never been here before, we might never be here again. And so I think in that context, the very first place to start here is to kind of go, you know what, it's kind of really okay to not know what's going on. We don't know, and can we accept that and own that and not be paralyzed by it? But can we let it be okay for us not to know? The quality that the poet John Keats talked about of negative capability, of being able to be in uncertainty without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. And of course, we'll grapple after certainty. We'll find ourselves wanting to think or believe or feel that it's all terrible and it's all going to end and it's going to be a disaster, that everything's going to collapse. Or at other times, we might find ourselves thinking, it's all going to be fine. We'll get through this and it will make us stronger. And we're probably going to have to be willing to let ourselves feel both those things or hold them both at the same time. So I think there's also a trap here, a risk, which is that we get very frantic, that our bias to action, our custom and our habit, our good intentions and our desires kind of lead us into a frantic frenzy. And as I say, for some people, this will be the hardest day ever work if you're on the front line. But for most of us, that's not the case. But we may feel as if it is. And so I feel this myself, these sort of daft ideas I have about what I ought to be doing right now. I mean, how do I know? This has never happened before. And who was it that said that at a time like this, in the middle of a pandemic, we need to be productive? And what would it mean to be productive now? Because you can't just do what you did before. And I think underlying that as well, a bias that we have, we tend to criticize people for not doing things rather than criticizing people for doing things. And often these conversations also are with ourselves. So we might need to reconsider that and think about, is this moment a moment to actually allow ourselves to not do things as much as to do them, and not to be critical of others or ourselves for doing that. And all of this, again, calls to mind a line from the book, which I wrote, that busy is the new lazy. So just being busy, just continuing on. You know, I think keeping calm is probably a good idea, but I think just carrying on is not such a wise option. And within that, in my own world of running kind of workshops and programs and training of different kinds, the temptation and the tendency to think that the immediate and right thing to do is to focus on moving everything online. Now, I'm conscious as I'm saying that this is what we've done with the Do lecture, but it's an experiment. And I think that there's tons that we can learn from that, and tons we're learning already, and there's opportunities, but it's not as simple as just trying to replicate what we've done before. Because these times, I think, are not a problem to solve. This is an experience that we have to live, and we have to live through. And that's where the pause comes in, I think, that first we have to feel it. And I'm not sure that we've begun yet. So we're not doing what we normally do, but have we really yet realized what's going on? Have we really sunk into it? I think I had fantasies 2 weeks ago that I would just read the great works of literature. And of course, that's not been the case. But maybe it's just not the case yet. And so I think a really good place to start is to get curious, to get really curious. As I was writing the book and talking to many people about different kinds of pause in different fields, be it sports or music or theatre or Zen practice, one of the things that became apparent quite quickly is that a pause is not nothing, and it's not empty, that it can be a very rich and fertile time, and unexpected things can emerge and appear if you let them. So there's a different quality or experience that time has, and I think we're all beginning to feel that a week or a day from this last couple of weeks feels very different from a week or a day, say a month ago. So I think this is about allowing ourselves to sink into it and getting curious about what's going on, rather than trying to skip over it, and holding our desire to get out of this and just keeping that to one side and allowing ourselves to think about, are we willing to actually be in it? And so for me, a theme that emerged again in the book was this notion that not all time is the same. It has depth and quality. And so whilst it's natural and normal for us all to be asking, how long is this going to last? That's troublesome because it's not quite clear what this is. It keeps changing and will keep changing, I'm sure. And also maybe a different question, more interesting question to ask would be, how deep can we go? Not how long will it last? So being curious about that and trying to understand and notice and work out, how are you reacting? Or what else is possible? Or what can you do with this time? So I think that holding is the requirements of courage and patience. And I think Erling Kage, in his wonderful book, Silence, talks about the power of wonder in both its senses. So wonder as in, I wonder what will happen, be open and questioning. But also the sense of wonder that we tend to have as children, of holding an object up to the light and saying, what is this? What could it be? What could I do? How could we use this time? So for me, I think the other body of work I draw on here is the improvisation. I think in a way we're all improvisers now, that at every level we can't plan more than a few hours or days or maybe a week ahead. We're going to have to deal with things that come at us that we can't expect. And some of those will be negative things, but some might be opportunities that we might grasp. So I think in that spirit, I think the first thing that we can do is start to really appreciate and notice what is around us. Maybe things that normally we don't have attention for as we kind of rush by and hurtle on, so convinced that our goals are worth pursuing. And many people have commented to me over the last few weeks about the sheer quality of quiet that there now is, even in large cities. The background of stillness and how you can access that and notice it and sink into it, and it makes you feel different. I talked in the book about going for a walk with my sister in the mountains in Spain and finding myself in a hurry to get on, and contrasting that with the experience for her, which was new. She hadn't done that walk before, of stopping and enjoying and taking it in. So even in this time of difficulty, can we do that? Can we invite ourselves to stop and enjoy and take in the simple things that we have around us, whether they be kind of moments of beauty, things of beauty, whether they be things about ourselves that we have the opportunity to discover. So as well as appreciating and noticing, I think we have the chance, almost the obligation, to question and challenge. So a friend of mine who's a coach talked about in his sessions, which were already online before any of this occurred, as he said, it tends to eradicate the bullshit, that this way of being in this kind of uncomfortable space takes him and the client straight to the important questions, the real questions. So there's an efficiency there, a saving, a clarity. So for you, what questions are becoming clear? What do you miss? And what do you not miss in this situation? And that may be material things, but beyond those. So what opportunities do you miss, or what things are you glad that have faded away? Bill Gates famously used to design for himself think weeks, where he would go to the woods, be in a cabin, actively, consciously disconnect, take reading material with him that was nothing to do with the everyday business. And so he worked quite hard and quite consciously to create that opportunity for himself. Now, obviously it's not this simple, but in a way, many of us have been given that opportunity right now, where we don't have to work to get across that hurdle. We've been given some space which we can choose to use. So we can choose to not try and stay up with the newspapers or social media, and to create a little space of deep work for ourselves. Or perhaps a more modest ambition might be one expressed by Amanda Palmer. So when she was pregnant, she's a performer and a musician, pregnant and had a baby, she found herself unable to work. And she borrowed a distinction from another musician, Henry Rollins, where he distinguishes in his own time between inhale time and exhale time. And so exhale is when you're kind of on. So for these musicians, that was kind of performing and working. And Amanda Palmer found herself unable to do that. And so the contrasting kind of time is to inhale. And so she regarded this time as with the small child as inhale time, when she's refreshing, perhaps indirectly, creative sources and looking at things she wouldn't normally look at. So if it's hard for you to use this time directly, if you reframe it as inhale time and allow yourself to speak to different people, listen to different things, read different books, look at different stimuli and see what that brings to you, it could be encouraging and replenishing. And then beyond the questioning and challenging, there is the chance to experiment and try new stuff out. Here we are experimenting with this, and I feel even at this distance through this technology, there's a great willingness and kindness and permission to try new things. So again, the stakes are lowered for trying new experiments. And I've heard people talk about changing the way they work, their rhythms and their routines, getting up at a different time, sleeping in a different way. For me personally, I'm experimenting with being more of a writer and asking myself, well, maybe facilitation and being physically present with something is something I will need to do less of or leave behind or change in some way. And that's been a very anchoring thing for me, very centering, very helpful, and I feel very nourishing. So things that one could try. And as I say, I think we're kind of all improvisers now. And so those improv practices of letting go, what is it you could let go of? Let go of a behavior, of a belief, let go perhaps of part of your identity. What else could you notice? What can you pay attention to, whether it's within you, or whether it's just enjoying and appreciating the people that you're with? And if you're not with people, enjoying and appreciating the capacity to connect with people. And using everything. We were joking before I started about, making this do logo here, using only what we had in the house, a bit like a scene from an Apollo movie, and seems to have worked. So for me, I think in summing up, I think I regard pause as a kind of portal, as a way into something else. And so kind of my hunch or my feeling is that if we really want to transform or change ourselves, our businesses, brands, our society as a whole, probably some kind of pause was going to be necessary. And none of us anticipated or thought it would be like this, of course. But there's this unique opportunity in the midst of a shock like this. And a few weeks ago, my elder sister talked to me about how this must have been how our parents felt in 1939 in the lead up to the war. And that was a few weeks ago, so things are very different now. And I think she was right about the uncertainty, about we know this is going to unfold and change, but we don't know how, and we don't know what it's going to mean or ask of us. But I think there's an important difference as well. And I think that difference is that this is not one set of human beings in conflict with each other. We see ripples of that, but very quickly and very deeply, I think there is the awareness that if we get through this, we get through it all together. And so there's going to be a change and a shift. And it's not about human conflict. I think it's absolutely extraordinary to try to consider or imagine what happens when every human being's attention is focused on the same issue from different angles with different interests in different places, of course, but also all of us visibly vulnerable together. And we don't know. And I have no idea more than anyone else, but the possibility and the promise that that might hold, I think we would do well to pay attention to. I was struck recently listening to a podcast by the astronaut that took the photo Earthrise, which is the famous photograph of the Earth rising behind the moon. And I was quite charmed by the story he told, that actually wasn't meant to take it. The photographs had all been directed, but he took this one actually improvising. And it turned out to be this extraordinary and seminal image, which was the first time we as a species had really seen our home as a single entity from afar, hanging there in space against the black background. And that had a huge but indirect effect. It wasn't that it suddenly changed things, but it changed our consciousness, and all sorts of things one can track back to that: the beginning of the Whole Earth Catalogue, foundation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the banning of DDT, and an uprise and an upwelling in environmental consciousness and sensitivity. And I think there may be such an opportunity here. An image and images can be enormously powerful, we know that, but this time we have a visceral feeling, all of us, contained or isolated or about to be contained or having been contained. We're all of us sharing some kind of global experience here of connectivity. And so I think the opportunity within that, which I have no idea what may be, but I think it's extremely likely that that could change our sensibility and our sensitivity to some very important matters. I don't think that will be linear. I think history will be able to tell us what that led to, perhaps. And what I'm sure of, though, is it won't be an engineered or a central response, that it will play out for each of us ourselves about how we transform ourselves or our work, for our organizations and businesses and brands, and perhaps to society on a larger scale as well. So I don't think it'll be linear, but I do think we all have the chance to be involved. And this is where the patience comes in. I don't think we have any idea yet what that will be, but I'm absolutely sure that we will require compassion for ourselves and others, the courage to try new and different things and to fail and try again and try different things, and the patience to understand that this is never going to be over and we're never going to go back to normal, but there will be a new normal and it won't always be like this. And so I think the promise of this pause is both enormous but unknown. And I think our challenge is to see if we can put it to constructive use. So I'm just now going to stop the clock for a minute. And some questions have been coming in, I imagine. The way this is going to work, I've got my phone here in my hand. And with the Do crew back in Wales, we've got a little WhatsApp group. And so what I'm going to do is they will have been sending some questions my way. We'll have about 10 minutes for this. And we're going to see what questions we've got. Okay, right. So this is a question from Miranda Berry. Hi, Miranda. The question is this: how do you actually pause when the urge is to be busy, to try and find control, to overachieve? Very good question. I've been asked something similar a lot. How do you make pause not another thing to do on your to-do list? And I think, so this is where the compassion comes in. So don't shoot for the moon, start small. One of the things I think is amazing about a pause is we don't know how long one is. And so a pause could just be, it could be a breath. It could be counting to one. And so I think the first thing there is, if you can create just the tiniest of spaces, you can then notice, as you put it, your desire to be busy and find control and to overachieve. So using your body is very helpful to that. You can use thresholds, count to one. I quite like that one rather than 10 as you cross a doorway or enter a room. Find triggers in your daily life that you can use for a very small pause. You can invite people around you to help you with that, to remind you to point it out and to try and grow it from there. And I think the compassion, as I said, comes in by understanding that, yeah, we've been trained and developed to have that drive and that achievement. At the moment, the drive and achievement is pretty hard to direct. So actually, I think now the chances is more propitious for that. So start small, I would say. This one from Morgan Phillips. Some people are calling this the big pause. What are your thoughts on this as a framing? My thought on that is yes, it is, and no, it's not. I think it's more complex than that, because it's as I say, it's easy. There's been an interregnum, a change from what we normally do, but it's very easy to fill that up. So I think the opportunity is to make this the big pause. I think each of us in everyday life, I certainly find that hard. But taking a step back, I think, yeah, there is the opportunity. David Hyatt put it very well the other day in a post of his, which was that more people have more time now to rethink their priorities than ever before. And I think it will be a reference point we'll go back to. So one of the other things to think about is the effects of pauses aren't always noticed or felt in the pause. So this will be a reference point. And we may, in months to come, look back at this and go, oh yeah, remember how that felt. So again, patience, don't expect to know the answer anytime soon, if ever. Oh, Gary Hirsch, well, here you go. My business partner in the improv work for many years. So he says, I've been examining the improv practice of letting go during this time and have found the opposite question to be equally as helpful. What do I want to keep about this moment? Any thoughts on this opposite idea would be welcome. Yeah, Gary, I think that's a nice way to think of it. I think letting go is the most troublesome of the improv practices when you explain it very briefly, because people often think it means letting go of everything all at once. And that you can't hold on to anything. And I think that's not right. I think, so by implication, if you're going to choose what you let go of, then you also are choosing what you hold on to. So I think as a way of prioritizing, it's really interesting to see, maybe one way to ask this now is, what are you quite naturally letting go of? What is slipping away or seeming less important? Or what do you have energy for and what don't you? So it's not about letting go of everything, but it's interesting to notice those things that seem to be slipping away. So I think it's really useful to focus on that. What do you want to hold on to? And if you do that, then give yourself permission to let go of everything else. So don't try and hold on to everything. It's kind of the piece. This from Diane Cunningham. How do you hold the pause when LinkedIn and other platforms are full of examples of businesses that have pivoted quickly? Is everyone rushing to the answer? It feels like there's a pressure to come up with a new business approach quickly. Yeah, there is. There's a huge pressure to do that, and it's misguided, in my view. And those stories that you see, the idea of being an instant expert at this point in time, I think is ridiculous. And so I think one should allow yourself, you should allow yourself to see it as that. That some people will always do that. Some people will always claim to know the answer. But right now, you don't even know what the problem or the issue is, or what the opportunity might be. So it seems nothing if not premature. And that doesn't mean to say you need to sit there and be paralyzed, but, you know, try small, safe to fail experiments, try different things. Don't pander to that sensation that we know the answer. Quote Gertrude Stein at them. She said, there ain't no answer, there ain't ever going to be no answer, and that is the answer. I tend to think much more in terms of what's a good response, not what's the right answer. So even that shift in language, start thinking about good responses, not right answers. And somebody's, you know, invented the term already, productivity porn, you know, there it is. Think of being an experimenter and an experiencer, not an expert. And if you feel like it, call out people who are experts or investigate more and get curious about that. And maybe you've got something to learn from them. Maybe something different from what they think they have to offer you. Let's see, how are we doing? James Bishop, last question. Hello, James. How do you draw the line between being busy and being efficient? Well, it assumes that drawing a line is a good thing. As to me, it's about attention. So can you keep noticing what seems to work for you, which would be, I'm kind of partial myself to thinking more in terms of effectiveness than efficiency. Efficiency for me is a machine notion, which is about paring down waste and stripping stuff away and doing only what's needed, and getting very kind of, very efficient in that sense. And I think at this moment, I don't know, think of the human genome. Most of the DNA in it is what used to be called, they've got another name for it now, but it used to be called junk DNA. In other words, it's ideas that we don't know how to use yet, hanging around waiting for an opportunity to mutate. So when you need to be creative and come up with different answers because problems are changing and it's all uncertain, then being efficient in that sort of focused way is quite hard. And that lots of the richness and the potential solutions to things will come from the idleness or the downtime or the distraction or the lateral liminal piece. So I think efficiency comes at a different cost. But overall, in terms of how do I navigate how I spend my time, my thing would be pay attention to how you're feeling, pay attention to your energy and respect that, and have and hold yourself gently and kindly. So that's it for now. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attention. And enormous thanks to the people at the Do Lectures for the help and support to put this in hand. It's been quite a deal. We only came up with the idea really during the course of the week, so it's been amazing to do that. And also for the opportunity for me to experiment and try this out. So thanks very much, and everybody have a great weekend. I'm off for a drink now.